Welcome again to another episode of Kahani Kashmir ki. To ichu sarni myon yani Deepika Zutshi hun namaskar, and to all of you hat navvari hun mubarak. I'm very happy that you are continuing to be here with us every single episode of Kahani Kashmir ki. So today I have a very special treat for you. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a youngster, a teenager whose lists of achievements is going to put any adult to shame. In spite of a very busy study schedule and high school schedule and sports and activities, she is a published author at the age of 16. It just doesn't get more amazing and awe-inspiring than that. So today I'm going to welcome to the studio Anushka Dhar. Namaskar, Anushka.
Namaskar. It's nice to meet you.
Very hearty welcome to the show, and we are really proud of you and your contributions to the Kashmiri Pundit group and to just being an inspiration to Indian youngsters in general. So we are very honored that you joined us here today.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here.
Oh, great. So Anushka, tell us, at an age when before we get into it, let me introduce the book that you have written to everybody. I am very proud to show everybody this beautiful book called Take Me Home, National Highway 44. And any Kashmiri worth their salt is going to know what National Highway 44 is. And this is a beautiful book that has been written by Anushka. And not only does it have a beautiful narrative and stories and anecdotes in it, it also has these beautiful pictures that will take you back to Kashmir. I mean, there are some amazing narratives and stories and anecdotes, but one of the most mesmerizing experiences for me as a reader, Anushka, was also the pictures that you have included. And I'm going to ask you questions about that, though. So for everybody who's watching, Take Me Home, National Highway 44, I would highly recommend everybody read it. Kashmiri or not, everybody needs to read this because it's a very poignant story and narrative of a very traumatized and displaced diaspora of Kashmiri Pundits. So having said that, welcome Anushka to our show. And I want to start us off with a very basic question. At an age when most girls are into, most kids, I would say, are into fashion and Instagram and, all the fun things that you teenagers do, what was the impetus for you for initiating this very complex and very sensitive project?
So I am a Kashmiri Pandit. I come from a Kashmiri Pandit family. Let me just put that out there. But despite being a Kashmiri Pandit, for the longest time, I was alienated from my roots. And I speak about that in the book as well. We were from Kashmir. My parents, they speak Kashmiri. My grandparents speak Kashmiri. We eat Kashmiri food, but we never spoke of Kashmir. For the longest time, I didn't understand why. So I grew up not knowing anything about Kashmir. And when you're younger, you hear your friends talk about their hometowns and visiting their hometowns and their culture. And I always felt like I didn't fit in that sense because I very rarely had anything to contribute simply because I didn't know anything. And over time, I just became more and more curious. And then in school, actually, an opportunity presented itself where I had to do a project that was related to my identity. It's called the personal project. And so it pushed you to dive deeper into who you are and explore a part of yourself you didn't know too well. And so I decided to explore my cultural identity and learn about my Kashmiri Pandit roots because I reached a point where I really wanted to know, because when you don't talk about something because Kashmiri wasn't spoken at our house, I knew that there was something that my parents are protecting me from, that my grandparents are protecting me from. but I didn't exactly know what it was. And it's quite embarrassing now for me to look back at that and say that at the age of 14, as a Kashmiri Pandit, I didn't know about the Exodus. And so when I was told about the Exodus as I started upon my personal project, I realized that if I, as a Kashmiri Pandit, don't know about the Kashmiri Pandit Exodus, how do I expect other people, other teenagers or adults, as a matter of fact, who aren't Kashmiri Pandits, to know about the Exodus? And that was something that really drove me to writing this book.
That is fantastic. Tell me a little bit, you explained to me a little bit about how, you grew up in a very, essential Kashmiri Pandit family, and yet you were somehow protected from there seems to be like a, background of like a harsh reality of some sort that you weren't necessarily exposed to. Tell me a little about that part, the darker part, and how that then uh, then got into or seeped into your work, and how did that impact the writing itself and the work that you did?
So I think the reason why my parents or my grandparents didn't speak about Kashmir was simply because it was too painful.
Yeah.
Reliving those memories of, not only the Exodus itself, but what happened before and after the Exodus, and the struggles that they faced and the
Right.
trauma that they faced, that was very difficult to cope with. And so I think now that they had finally been able to resettle successfully and move on with their lives, it was difficult for them to rehash it. And I think that struggle and the emotional connection that they still feel to the land comes out in my book. I think it was very important for
Yes.
me not only to focus on the challenges and the emotional turmoil of the Exodus, but also to talk about how, despite the Exodus, the Kashmir Pandit community still feels very, very connected to to Kashmir and to the valley. And you can see that in the festivals they celebrate. We still eat Kashmiri food, and even though they may not speak of Kashmir directly and what their life was like in Kashmir, I don't think it's because they don't feel connected to the land. It's because they feel bitter about what happened. It's simply because it's too painful for them to constantly talk about it, because it is a very traumatic experience and it is a life changing experience. And I understand why I was sheltered from it, because it is very unfortunate, and for a youngster it can be very brutal to learn about that. And so I understand that now, and it was very important that I brought out this entire thing through the book as well.
You explained that very beautifully, and that is exactly the point that I was trying to get to, is that is the part I was most amazed about the book, that talking about such a dark time in this with this entire group of people, and you were still able to, at not one point in the book, not at the end of the book, at multiple points in the book, you were able to distill the hope and the enthusiasm and the verve that the Kashmiri community has. You were able to distill that from the dark experiences and were able to so beautifully put forward in the book. And I was amazed at how, at your age, you were able to do something which, in my mind, is very, very mature and very adult. And you were able to, still bring that ray of hope to this group of displaced people who've not necessarily had a very happy last 30 years. That was one of the most amazing things for me. Tell
Thank
me a
you.
little bit about what was the hardest part for you. Was it culling the stories out? Was it actually writing the stories down? Tell me a little bit about your process, and then what became the hardest part for you.
I think writing, there was some struggle, there were some challenges that I faced during writing, especially in terms of the emotions I felt while writing. Because, again, as I said before, it's a very traumatic experience. And my research process included speaking to a lot of Kashmiri Pandits and speaking to figures who knew a lot about the Kashmiri Pandit exodus, like Mr. Ashok Pandit, who was very supportive of me throughout this entire process. And so when I was going through all the information I'd collected and the research I had done, when I was starting to write it, of course, I felt a lot of emotions that, they weren't the best. And I knew that if I wanted to write this book successfully, I had to be objective despite being
Mhm.
a Kashmiri Pandit. I had to approach this as objectively as I could. And so there were quite a few moments where I had to distance myself from writing the book because I would, have tears in my eyes, or I would feel angry, or I would feel heartbroken, and I can't let that, you know, um, ruin what I am, or affect what I'm writing. And so I had to
Mhm.
distance myself from the writing
Mhm.
process on multiple occasions, and then come back to it later when I think I was a little more, when I'd calmed myself down. And so I
Yeah.
think that was challenging. And I started writing this when I was 14. And as a 14-year-old,
Mhm.
feeling all those emotions for the first time was very overwhelming. And
Yes.
I mean, so yeah, and I felt like my dad was always busy with work. My mom is into Kashmiri Pandits. And so at home, I didn't have
Mhm.
anybody to go to and talk to about those emotions.
Hmm.
So I had to make sure that I dealt with it as maturely as I could.
That is just amazing, amazing. Tell me a little bit. You gave us a sneak peek into your process as a writer. You said, you talk to a lot of people, our community stalwarts like, Ashok Panditji, you talk to him. And, even within the book, you have a lot of, anecdotal pieces in the book with names and pictures of people who have shared their stories. Tell me a little bit about that process. How did this whole thing come about, with a busy 14-year-old's life, who was just going to do this little school project, and this became this huge thing. Tell me a little bit about that entire process, and how did that pan into an actual, beautiful piece of work like this?
So of course, I started researching for my school project. I wasn't even sure what I was getting into at the beginning of this because I didn't know about the Kashmir Pandit Exodus or the Kashmir Pandit story. And so I just thought that bef- before writing, I should just have as much information as possible because that's the only way I can successfully capture the Kashmir Pandit story. I can't write what I want. I can only write what their story is. And
Right.
so I was pretty clear on that. And so I think I spent quite a few months just researching. Even though my school didn't like that, they were like, you need to start writing. We have a deadline coming up. I was like, I need the research. I need to know more. And so again, I remember the first meeting I had with Mr. Ashok Pandit, where I met him. I sat down and I hit record on my phone, and he just spoke for about 2.5 hours. And I just sat there listening and absorbing all the information. And I was shocked because, and a little embarrassed because, as I said before, as a Kashmiri Pandit, I was like, how do I not know this? Why don't I know this? And I continued to meet with him, and I then contacted a lot of the Kashmiri Pandits I knew, people my family knew, family friends from around the world, and I would get on call with them, and I would just say, "Tell me your story. I don't have any questions for you. I don't want to guide you in what you say. I want this to be as authentic and honest and real." And so I would just say, "Speak. This is your chance to really just share your story." And I would sit with them for hours and just absorb all that information in. And because I devoted so much time to this research process, there were times where I had to, give up on sleep, or not, or, not, I couldn't go out with my friends because I chose to stay back and do this. But I was ready to make that sacrifice because as I sort of went on with this process and got involved with it, I became more and more passionate about it. And initially, I'd said before that, I started this to learn more about my Kashmiri Pandit roots. And so it was initially a journey of self exploration. But as I got involved with this, my entire objective changed. It started with me trying to find myself, but it ends with me trying to really help my community put forth their story and share their collective hope of going back home to the valley one day. And so that was like an entire transition that happened.
Yeah, and that seems like a very logical process to me. In that, the research would have had to take you such a long time because of obvious reasons. You were sheltered from all the craziness and all the pain and all the facts, even of the Exodus. So researching and learning about that definitely makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to ask you an interesting question. So, this book is absolutely filled with beautiful images. And like I said, for me, a huge part of the experience of reading the book was not just reading the narratives and the anecdotes that you have in there, and obviously your take on where we are as a community right now, but these beautiful pictures, pictures of mountains, of parks, and images of Kashmiri people. Tell me a little bit about how that came about. How did this beautiful book come about, where you're writing this very inspired and at times very painful narrative, but then you intersperse it with these beautiful images that, as a Kashmiri, it brought tears to my eyes in a lot of places. I enjoyed, and I, to this day, I've read the book a couple of times now, and I keep, leafing through it again and again, oftentimes, just to even look at the pictures again. So tell me a little bit about how that idea germinated, and how did you pick the pictures and images, and how did that effectively intersperse with your narrative?
So when I was doing my research, I realized that, of course, the Kashmiri Pandit community went through that trauma and are still hopeful of going back home. But the way they voiced it was very interesting. If you see Kashmiri Pandits, through their art, have shared their story. There's so many songs, so many artworks, pieces of literature as well. And that was their voice. They didn't go and protest. They didn't go and fight back violently, as one would typically do when faced with that situation. And that was something that spoke volumes. And so from the get-go, I was very clear that I wanted to include Kashmiri Pandit artworks and wanted to put that point across. And I speak about that in my book as well. And to further substantiate that idea, I tried to put as many paintings and pictures. And a lot of them are from Kashmiri Pandits themselves. But I also tried to include pictures and paintings that help the audience understand the Exodus better, because I think pictures also speak louder than words, right? And there is, I think pictures have their own value, and so do words. And when put together, I think the message and the degree to which the message is put across, I think, is very unique and very powerful. And I wanted to make sure that everybody who's reading the book understood the degree of what happened. And I think the best way to do that was, again, to amalgamate pictures and words and sort of just put it together. And finding the pictures was incredibly difficult, because the Kashmir Pandit Exodus wasn't documented very well. There are very few videos, very few pictures. Unfortunately, the media wasn't really recording that, or wasn't really trying to put that entire thing past all of that information and the entire Exodus onto the rest of the country. And so that was something that really that I didn't find very nice, to put it very simply. And so that it was definitely a challenge, and I had to I struggled with the pictures, but I'm glad that we finally have something that helps people understand the Kashmiri Pandit story better.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And readers like me, we, derived a lot of pleasure from looking at the pictures. And, for people who are watching who haven't read the book, like I said, I highly recommend reading the book. And I promise you that you will be filled with a sense of awe and nostalgia when you even just look at the pictures. So it's definitely worth a read for sure. So Anushka, let me change tracks a little bit. I want to read an excerpt from the book. It's a very short excerpt. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it and your opinion on what you mention in the book. So I'm going to read that right now. So the excerpt is: the beauty in the survival of the Kashmiri Pandits was that despite being abused and attacked with guns and knives, they did not pick up weapons. They fought back, but stayed true to the underlying and fundamental core of Kashmirian: no violence. Despite being mistreated and basic human rights being snatched away from them by their Muslim friends, they did not counter violence with violence. They fought back, but did not do it in a violent manner. And that is not because they were scared or cowardly. It was because using violence, fighting fire with fire, went against the grain of everything they believed in. This passage spoke very loudly to me, Anushka. And here's why. Because here you speak of a couple of things, and you've spoken about it in multiple places in the book. First, you mention the fact that Kashmiri Pundits, when they faced this terrible trauma of the Exodus, did not retaliate in a violent manner. And it's not because that they were scared or cowardly, but it's because inherently they don't believe in nonviolence. And then you spoke of, Kashmiriyat. Tell me a little bit about what does Kashmiriyat mean to you, and explain to us a little bit about how you came to this, beautiful and very accurate, in my opinion, conclusion that, that's not what Kashmiriyat is. Kashmiri Pandits will not react to violence with violence, which instinctive human nature to do that. But that's not who we are. That's not what we do. So tell us a little bit about this passage, and tell us a little bit about what Kashmiriyat means to you.
So I hadn't come across the term Kashmiriyat until I sort of started this process. But as I learned more about Kashmiriyat, which is, which I think on the lines is living in harmony and sort of promoting peace and staying true to yourself, even in the worst of times, when you feel like you are forced to do something that you don't believe in, but you still stay true to yourself and hold your ground. And I, so as I said before, I didn't know what Kashmiriyat was, in the sense that I'd never come across that term. But as I learned more about it, I realized that my parents have and my grandparents have been instilling that very value in me from the get-go. And they may not have said it explicitly that this is Kashmiriyat, but everything that they've taught me and told me, and my entire upbringing has been in that way to again hold. And so I was very compelled to again bring that out of my book, because that was one thing out of the many that I had felt. And I had not been a part of the Exodus. I had not felt anything they had felt and gone through. And so the fact that I could relate to them on some level through this value or this idea really, really mattered to me. And therefore I was just very compelled to bring this through. And I also, as I said before, when I was doing my research, when I spoke to Mr. Ashok Pandit, and when I was speaking to Mr. Anupam Kher as well, who was again my mentor, they of course shared how much they shared their trauma, but they also shared that they never felt like violence was the right way to go. And this happens, and I came across this with all the Kashmiri Pandits I spoke to. They never felt like they that they had to resort to violence despite so much happening with them, because they felt like they would be betraying everything they stood for and everything that they believe in, and they felt that in itself would be a betrayal to their community and to their ideals. And that's what I respect so much, that despite being pushed to the limit, despite losing everything, that the Kashmiri Pandit community held their ideals and their values close to themselves. It was almost like, we may not have anything right now, but that's what we have. We at least have our values. And I think that speaks a lot about their character. And again, that's why I was compelled about bringing it bringing it in my book.
Yeah. And you've expressed it so beautifully. And like I said, you've expressed in multiple places. And I felt very proud. I mean, I know that we were never violent, and we know, I know, a lot of the history in the background and the happenings during the Exodus, but having it, expressed it in the way that you did, it felt really beautiful, and I felt very proud to be a Kashmiri Pandit, when I read that. So thank you for inspiring that in your readers, and that was very powerful for me. Coming from somebody much younger than me, and it was still so insightful and so compelling. It felt very strong. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so let us talk a little bit about, since we are talking about age and maturity, and I don't want to keep embarrassing you, but you are wise beyond your years, and not only in talking to you, but in having read your work, I feel, the wise soul in you. So, uh, as somebody who has done all of this research and put it out there, what would be your message to all of the displaced Kashmiri Pandits who are out there, and a lot of them have rebuilt their lives. A lot of them are, maybe still not quite there yet, but are continuing to fight to regain entry into their homeland, and not only regain entry, but regain safe entry, and then ultimate safety in their homeland. And what would be your message to all of those displaced people? And what would you say to them?
So first of all, thank you for calling me wise and mature. That makes me feel I'm flattered. Um, I think my message, firstly, I would just like to tell them that I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier. Maybe I was way too. 14 is anyways a young age. I understand that. So maybe starting this at 12 would be way too young. But I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier. I'm still gonna apologize. And I would also like to tell them that I think the Kashmir Pandit community for the longest time felt unseen, in the sense that their story, despite being so traumatic, wasn't put forth and still remains unknown by many Indians. And this event has shaped India in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just like to tell them that, I respect them and I see
Mm-hmm.
them, and that I support them and believe in them and everything that they have done, as I said before, in rebuild and in how they've conducted themselves, despite
Mm-hmm.
having everything snatched away from them, just makes
Mm-hmm.
me respect all of them so much more.
Yeah.
And so I also like to say that I'm going to continue fighting for them. And this is not the end. I'm going to, of course, champion the Kashmir Pandit narrative throughout my work, hopefully, until the end of my career. So,
The beautiful words, such beautiful words coming from, such a young person. It makes my heart feel so full of pride and joy for the Kashmiri community, that we have such an amazing jewel like you. Um, so okay, so you said some very poignant words for the displaced Kashmiri Pandit, which I'm sure will be a source of comfort and solace to everybody. What would you say to the younger Kashmiri generation, the Kashmiri Pandit generation, who may be your age or younger, who have either never been to Kashmir or don't feel a connection with Kashmir? What would you say to them? Now we are talking to the young kids. Maybe they're eating Kashmiri food at home, but maybe they don't have the language, for example. What would you say to them?
so you spoke about them not feeling connected to Kashmir, and I'd like to say that for the longest time, even I didn't feel connected to Kashmir.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
still don't speak Kashmiri very well. My Kashmiri is terrible, really terrible. So please don't speak to me in Kashmiri, but I'm trying. Regardless of that, I would just like to tell them that it's so worth getting to know your roots. It is so worth it. And it may seem confusing in the beginning, like, why am I doing this? It doesn't really matter anymore. I've lived 14, 15 years of my life not knowing about my cultural roots. It's okay. It doesn't matter. But trust me, once you know it, once you understand um, just Kashmir and the Kashmiri Pandit ideals and community much better, you'll understand your family better, and you'll understand everything that they've been trying to instill in you and everything that they stand for so much better. And I feel so I not only feel more connected to Kashmir, but I feel more connected to my grandparents, as a matter of fact.
So,
And and so I would just like to say that it's so worth getting to know Kashmir. And also, I was speaking to my father about this as well. So he's in the media industry, and he often says that I never did anything like this. Despite being a Kashmiri Pandit, I'm almost 50 years old. I've never done anything like this. And I think with that generation, they were so involved with resettling and sort of establishing a successful life that it didn't
yes.
even strike them. And I'm not trying to generalize, but for most of them, they were just too busy doing that. And
Yeah.
I think because of that, in a way, I felt a little disconnected to Kashmir because my father didn't try to instill it as much or didn't give it as much weightage. But it's not because he didn't want to. It's just because he didn't realize he wasn't giving it as much importance, or he wasn't doing anything to champion the Kashmiri Pandit narrative. And so I'd like to just tell the younger generation that you have the opportunity to support the Kashmiri Pandit community. And even though it may seem like it's not important, or what's done is done, I think they need it. I think the Kashmiri Pandit community needs that support,
Yeah.
and would really like to share their story on a larger platform. So
Yeah. Again, a very insightful thing I heard you say was something I hear on this show, and a lot of Kashmiri pundits that I talk to a lot, is exactly what you said. Is the one of the reasons why a lot of media hullabaloo wasn't made was because we didn't raise our voices, because we were in the shock of displacement, and we were worried where our next meal was going to come from, where were we going to live next. A lot of people were in either in camps, or were in small one room places in Jammu and Delhi, in places that were unfamiliar to them, and whether climatically they were not appropriate for somebody who'd never left the Srinagar Kashmir Valley. So I keep hearing that exactly what you said, is we were so concerned with making our next life move and life decision, that the larger part didn't wasn't a thing. We wanted to make sure that our daughters were safe first, our kids were back in school first. How education is such an important part of the Kashmiri community. And
definitely.
so that is exactly what I heard you say in your insightful manner, was that maybe your dad thought the same thing, that let's everybody get resettled first, and then we'll talk about any other external and extended help that can be provided to the rest of the community. But I feel like you are doing an amazing job at that. So obviously, he did
Thank
something
you.
right, and your parents raised you very well. Okay, so you talked about the fact that this is just the beginning. You are at the very cusp in the beginning of your career, really.
Mm.
Where do you see yourself going from here? What are your next steps in life and next moves? You have this amazing and absolutely, in my mind, smashing book under your belt, which of course should be a source of pride to you and your family. But what's next for you? I'm sure you're going places. Tell us all about them.
So currently, I'm just focusing on school because I'm in 12th grade. I'm graduating this year, which is very scary. Now that 2022 has started, it's just settling in. But so my main focus right now is just going to university, and I plan on studying film and television at university, because that my father is doing that, and I'm really inspired by his work, and I want to go into a similar field. And I really think that media can help champion the Kashmir Pandit narrative. And I've written a book. Maybe I'll I'll make a film, or a mini series. You never know. And so I plan on continuing um my work to support the Kashmir Pandit community and share their story. And I don't know how what it's exactly going to look like as of now, because I still want to complete my education. But I do plan on continuing what I've started with this book. So
Oh, that is fantastic. What a noble thought, and expressed so beautifully. Really proud of you, Anushka.
thank you.
Okay, I want to take a moment and ask you to read an excerpt from the book, and tell us a little bit about it. Read it to us, and tell us why you chose the excerpt, and what that means for you, and your expression as an author.
Okay, I will just open it. Give me a moment.
Take your time.
Yes. So I'm gonna read the introduction of my book for the younger audience, because in this excerpt, I talk about why I decided to do this. And I hope that connects with the younger audience, hopefully, and pushes them to learn more about their Kashmir Pandit roots. Or if they're not Kashmiri, just learn more about themselves, because I think that can be something that's very, very special. So I'm going to read the introduction so that you can read the rest of the book and enjoy it as you see fit. So,
Perfect.
your identity is a prison you can never escape. It is who you are, but it is so much more than that. It is a portrait painted by your past, your present, and your future. It is a mosaic carefully crafted by your goals, ambitions, and dreams. It is defined by where you come from, what you stand for, and what you are meant to do. A prison, despite trapping you your entire life, pushes you to explore the ocean by diving into its depths. Follow me as I dive into an ocean that is far deeper than we can imagine. But before I do that, let me give you some context. Once upon a time, there was an inquisitive, talkative, and innocent 6 year old girl. Her entire life, she was told that Srinagar, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, was her home, albeit she did not know what that meant because she'd never been there. So she asked a lot of questions. One day, that naive girl, unaware of the water she was treading, gathered the courage to go and ask her grandmother about her home. With complete confidence and certainty that one day she will go to Kashmir, the girl sat on the floor and asked her grandmother, who was sipping steaming kahwa, when will we go to Kashmir? Giving the young girl a cold stare as if in an attempt to hide her broken expression, the grandmother kept her kahwa aside, got up and walked away, leaving the girl more puzzled than ever. The topic of Kashmir was a taboo for as long as I can remember. Ironic, and I never knew why. Growing up alienated from Kashmir meant that I was alienated from an entire part of myself because I was kept away from understanding where came from. I failed to understand myself as a person. Trapped by the prison that is my identity, I felt lost. I felt like there was so much more to me, more to my Kashmir Pandit background than what I was told. With every passing year, the thirst for answers increased. Years of feeling incomplete, years of seeing faces twitch every time Kashmir was mentioned, years of confusion, rage, and neglect pushed me to ask the questions that everyone should have been asking a long time ago. Why is the Kashmiri Pandit community living in exile? Why is that so many Indians do not know about the catastrophe that took place in their own country? I need answers. I need people to know this story. I need people to understand that we, even today, live in a world blinded by hate. I didn't know what I was getting into or how I was going to go about it, but I knew that I needed to find the missing parts of the jigsaw puzzle. The parts that would give myself and my community a voice. Something that would honor the Kashmir Pandit community. Join me in this quest, and maybe we'll able to, and maybe we will be able to put together the whole picture.
Oh, that is just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. If nothing else that we talked about today encourages more readers to read your book, your introduction definitely does, because it is such a beautiful way of explaining and expressing, going from not knowing anything to, oh my God, let's, peel the layers of the onion and look into it and see all the various aspects of this, very, very dark times in the Kashmiri Pandit community history. Beautiful. I'm just going to ask you a couple more questions, and then I'm going to let you know. I know you're busy. Your time is precious, but in all of these conversations that you had with all of these people during your research, um, tell me what was what were a couple of things that you walked away with. Was there a theme that you felt was a common theme throughout all your conversations? Was there a specific thread, or was there something, did you have a big aha moment when you walked away from any of these interviews that you did? Tell me a little bit about, your conversations with people, and how, you walked away from those, and what did you walk away from those with as an author?
So if you if someone would have read the accounts that I've given in my book and the stories that I've shared of particular Kashmiri Pandits, there was one theme that was common to all of them, and that was, first of all, the hope of returning back home. And the way each of them spoke about Kashmir, not just the interviews I've mentioned in the book, but even generally when I was speaking to people, there was so much love and affection and respect for the land and its people, and that was something that really impressed me. It's difficult to, I think, even if you go through something as traumatic as that, it's very difficult to even accept the fact that A, that's happened, or B, even talk about that um that entire event or the exodus in this case. But the fact that they can do that and talk about Kashmir, that despite all those painful memories, they speak about it with so much love, so much respect, so much hope, and always with a smile. And that's not because it's because the emotions that they felt and the challenges that they faced were small. It's simply because they still feel so connected to Kashmir and they are so rooted in Kashmiriyat that they still look Kashmir and its people in a very positive manner. And that again was something that inspired me, because if I mean, I don't comprehend how someone could do that, or how someone can get over so much pain and trauma and continue to look at that source, the source of that pain and trauma, with so
Yeah.
much love. And
Yeah.
all of them had that shared hope and sentiment of being able to go to Kashmir once again. Because when they left Kashmir, they thought that they would be gone for maybe a few days, but it's
Yeah.
been 3 decades and they still haven't gone back. And
Correct.
because it's that even younger generations like myself hadn't been to Kashmir. I recently got the chance to go to Kashmir to meet the governor of Kashmir, which I was, I mean, I was honored to meet him and share my book with him. And I was also invited to speak at the Gulmarg Lit Fest about 2 or 3 months back. And so I got to go to Kashmir twice in the span of 1 month suddenly, having not gone for 17 years, and then I went twice in 1 month, which was crazy. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that shared sentiment of going back home is something that
Perfect.
made
And
it
I'm going to
possible.
ask you, oh, perfect. I'm going to ask you about
Yeah.
your visit to Kashmir because I was mindful about asking you about that, but I'm going to ask you that in a second. But what you said about the common theme reminds me of this line that you have in your book. You can take a Kashmiri Pandit out of Kashmir, but you can't take Kashmir out of a Kashmiri Pandit. And that was just so beautiful. I had to read it a couple of times and really enjoy it and say, that is definitely a common theme. Everybody pines for that. Everybody, hopes and wants and, wishes that, at some point they're able to go back to the valley and, set their roots back down again. So that's beautiful. Okay, tell me about your visit to Kashmir. After all of this, hearing about it and researching it and writing this book, you were able to go there. Tell me how that made you feel.
So both of my trips actually were very short. One was, I think, about 2.5 days. The other was 2 days. So they were very short trips, and we were on this very strict itinerary. We had a very strict schedule. We barely slept, and I had school going on, and so I there were times that I was sitting in my hotel room just doing schoolwork. But I think the first time that I went there, I was in absolute shock. The entire car ride from the airport to our hotel, I was just looking up the window. I did nothing else. I was in silence looking at the window. My parents were asking me questions,
Yeah.
and I did not reply because I was just, I mean, is this actually happening? I've dreamed of Kashmir and I've dreamed of going there and I've seen it in like pictures and movies, but I've never actually been there. And
Mhm.
my dad, who was going there for the first time in 30 years, was talking about this place and that place. So I used to go there, and I don't know, it made me very emotional. And then when I got to go to a lot of places that were symbolic for Kashmir Pandits, like the Kir Bhavani temple,
Yeah.
that was also something that was very, very personal, and that it's something that's, is going to stay with me forever, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I have beautiful memories of going to the Kir Bhavani temple as a child and with my parents, and yeah, that always does stay with me too. So I can imagine how powerful it might be for you. Okay, so we are at the end of our time, and I want to, as always, I want to end on a fun and a lighter note. We talked about some heavy things today and talked about very insightful things from you today. I want to end on a fun and a light note, as all our viewers know that I always like to do. What is your favorite Kashmiri food? What is your favorite Kashmiri dish? What do you enjoy the most?
As cliche as it sounds, Rogan Josh, definitely. And anything with nadru in it. I love nadru. So if you give me anything with nadru in it, I'll eat it. For sure.
Perfect. And mom's cooking, is that the best?
Mom is not Kashmiri, right? So mom doesn't cook Kashmiri food. Mom has
Okay.
started to cook Kashmiri food because my dad and
Uh-huh.
I have been demanding it. But
Uh-huh.
my dadi and my dad's aunt, my God,
Hmm.
their food, I don't get to eat it very often, but maybe once a month, and I make sure I eat. It's their food is delicious. And then when I went to Kashmir, the Kashmiri food I ate there was just,
Uh-huh.
I don't think I've ever eaten so much in my life.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Anushka. I'm really, really proud of of being a Kashmiri Pandit because you are one of us. And again, for all the people who are watching, definitely read this book. It will change your life. It will change your mind, and it will change your opinions on the story of the Kashmiri Pandit community. So definitely pick up this book wherever you can. I'm sure it's on Amazon and all the other usual places. So do pick it up and read it and enjoy it thoroughly, and follow Anushka wherever you can, because I promise you she's going places. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
joining
much.
us. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anushka. And to all the viewers, a very, very happy new year. And thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Kahani Kashmir Ki. Namaskar.